At noon in the campus, the sun shone through the leaves of the sycamore trees on the playground, and the slight wind sways gently shaking the lawn, bringing a sense of turquoise. Junjie sat in the side of the stands, holding an English book that had not been flipping a few pages in his hand, and his eyes were already far away. His eyes were on the basketball court far away, where there was a figure casting a basket, acting light and elegant. That was Ching, the goddess he recognized in the campus, and it was also a love he had hidden in his heart for 2 years. "Hey, Junjie, you're stunned again." How you next to him slapped him on the shoulder, smiling happily. "Are you secretly looking at Yang Ching again? Do you want your brother to help you with love books?" Junjie's face turned red, and he hurriedly put the book on and closed half of his face, and said, "Who is stupid? I'm memorizing the words." "Come on, you can recite the words until your eyes are almost falling into the basketball court." How you rolled his eyes and said in a low voice, "But seriously, you have been writing your love book for half a year, right? When will you dare to send it out? If you drag it on, the exercise will be over." Junjie felt nervous and touched his pockets with consciousness. "There is a book that has been written long ago. The handwriting is neat and it seems like a copying work. I don't dare to let others read it in a single sentence." He murmured in a low voice, "Don't say, I'm not ready yet." How you was about to talk about a few more words when suddenly his face changed, his eyes swept towards the other end of the playground with a sharp look, and said in a low voice, "You guy, there's something wrong with each other." "What's wrong?" Junjie looked over with his eyes. Only a few senior students were walking towards them. The head was wearing a black sports jacket, her hair was dyed golden, and there was an indescribable tick in her eyes. He thought this person, Yang Ming, was famous for being stung in the campus. He heard that he was hot and especially liked to find someone to be troubled. "My guy Yang Ming has been staring at the younger generation recently." How you said softly, and his eyebrows were tightly locked. "I have a bad feeling, so it's best to avoid it." Junjie pointed at the head, and just wanted to get up. He heard Yang Ming shouting far away, "Hey, the two on that side, don't leave." This sound was filled with unquestionable domineeringness, and Junjie's heart sank, stopped and looked back. Yang Ming walked to the stands with several followers, with a sneer on his lips and staring at him with his eyes curled up. "Is there anything wrong?" Junjie tried his best to calm his language, but his heart began to play drums. He didn't want to cause trouble, especially when Feng Qing was still away. "Is there something wrong?" "Of course, something wrong." Yang Ming grinned and slowly walked to several stages. As Junjie got closer and closer, "I heard that you have been in trouble recently. How many people in the lower grades said that you run as fast as the trend? I don't like hearing such bragging words the most, so, come and verify it." The handsome eyebrows were not in time for replying. How you next to him could no longer help but interrupt, "Yang Ming, are you looking for trouble? We haven't messed with you." "Didn't mess with me?" Yang Ming snorted coldly, his eyes swept over Hao Yu, and immediately locked Junjie. "I just don't think that some people are hiding, and they are low-key and want to get into trouble. Come on, compete with me for a game, running or fighting, you choose." Several followers around him burst into laughter, and the atmosphere suddenly became tight. Junjie clenched his fists and moved quickly in his brain. He knew that Yang Ming was not easy to mess with, but if he had retreated, wouldn't he have a face even more? What's more, Ching was still watching from afar. He didn't want to act like a slut in front of her. "Okay, just run when you run," Junjie said, gritting his teeth, with a stubborn voice in his voice, "but if you lose, don't worry me again." Yang Ming raised his eyebrows, as if he heard some funny joke. "Okay, the person who has passed down kneels down and shouts to brother, what about this condition?" Junjie didn't say anything, but just clicked the head. How you stomped his feet in a hurry, and said in a low voice, "Are you crazy? This guy is not easy to mess with at first glance." "It's okay, I'm responsible." Junjie patted Hao Yu on the shoulder and walked towards the runway of the playground. He was actually not sure, but at this point, he could only force himself to do it. The competition began soon, and a small group of students watching the hottest were surrounded by the field. Yanqing also stopped to throw the basket and looked far away. Junjie took a deep breath and his eyes closed on the runway ahead. With a whistle, he and Yang Ming rushed out at the same time. At first, the two of them had the same speed, but within a few seconds, Junjie felt a strange force coming out of his body. Every step he took was unusually light, as if he was being carried forward by the wind, and even the voice could be heard in his ears. He didn't think much about it, but just accelerated instinctively and quickly left Yang Ming behind. How is this kid possible? Yang Ming gritted his teeth, his face becoming more and more difficult. He quickly accelerated his pace, but no matter how he chased, he could not shorten the distance with Junjie. Finally, the line is getting closer and closer. Junjie almost rushed through at an incredible speed, winning without any thoughts. A shocking erupted from the surrounding area, and how you jumped up excitedly, June. Your speed is too high. Junjie was panting, and his brain was still recalling what he had just felt. What happened to the power of that wind? He looked down at his hand, believing that there was something wrong with him. However, before he could think about it, Yang Ming had already walked over with his face dark, his voice as if he wanted to eat people. What are you playing like? Ordinary people can't run so fast. I didn't play like a flower, you can't run away by yourself. Junjie replied coldly, but he started to feel uneasy. He could feel that there was a sense of danger in Yang Ming's eyes. Can't run away? Ha, I see what unsightly means you have hidden. Yang Ming suddenly raised his hand, and a cluster of flames appeared in his palm, and he rushed towards Junjie. Be careful. How you shouted, and Junjie instinctively flashed to the side, but the flames still wiped his arm, leaving a burning sting. His eyes widened, and there was a blank in his brain. Flame? How is this possible? Yang Ming, are you crazy? Junjie roared angrily, and found that his body once again had a strange feeling. The wind, the invisible wind circling around him, as if listening to his call. He waved his hand subconsciously, and only heard a whoosh sound. An invisible blade rushed straight away. Yang Ming reacted very quickly, and the flames formed a firewall in front of him, barely slamming the wind blade, but was still pushed back by force. He gritted his teeth and said, sure enough, you are not an ordinary person either. There is a kind of thing. Junjie stood there in a daze, looking at his palm, his heart beating almost popping out of his chest. What did he do just now? Wind blade? Is this his ability? It's over. How you rushed over, grabbed Junjie and shouted in a low voice, if you continue fighting, the whole school must know your secret. Yang Ming, let's stop today, don't force me to make things too big. Yang Ming sneered, put away the flames, and glared at Junjie fiercely. Okay, you're leaving today. But this is not over. At the sports meeting, I will let you know who is the king of the campus. After saying that, he turned away with his companion, leaving behind a quiet playground. Junjie had not returned to his senses from the shock that had just been shocked. How you was already anxiously pulling him to the stands. You guy, you are so moved just now. Your abilities are exposed. I don't know what's going on. Junjie looked down at his hand, with confusion in his voice. It just happened that way, it seemed like I was listening to my point. How you sighed and said in a low voice, I heard that you are not the only one who is capable in the campus. You have seen the flames that Yang Ming just now, right? And although my ability is not that strong, I can sense danger. This place is more complicated than you think. The handsome eyebrows in the brain formed a group. Are you saying there are others? Yes, and a lot. How you looked serious. I heard that there was a saying in the campus that only those who showed their true strength in sports can become the king of this school. Yang Ming, that guy, probably has set his sights on this goal for a long time. If you exposed your abilities today, he will definitely not let you go. Junjie was silent, his eyes unconsciously flying towards the Qingqing who was not far away. She seemed to see all this, and she was walking towards her with a little doubt in her eyes. His heart beats faster, and countless thoughts flashed in his brain. Do you want to tell her the truth? Or continue to be confused? June, you are fine just now? Ching Ching's voice was gentle, with a little care. She stopped a few steps away, with curiosity in her eyes that could not be hidden. I'm fine. Junjie smiled hard, feeling sweaty in his palms. He wanted to say something, but he swallowed it back in his mouth. The love book was heavy in his pocket, as if reminding him that some secrets were not the time to be said. It's fine if there's nothing to do. Ching Ching smiled, and stopped chasing her and walked back to the basketball court. But her back made the heart even more swell. Junjie, you have to be careful next. Hao Yu patted his shoulder, his lingering spirit was heavy. If Yang Ming doesn't want to let it go, he will definitely be bothering you before the sports meeting. Moreover, your wind ability is not simple. The handsome guy pointed his head, clamped his fists tightly, and there was a little more stability in his eyes. Whether it is Yang Ming's challenge or the secret in the campus, he has to face it. And the most important thing is that he wants to protect Qingqing, no matter what price he pays. The night was heavy, and the small trees on the mountain behind the campus were so quiet that only the sound and occasional snails were left. Junjie stood under an old pine tree, with both hands on her legs, and closed her eyes to try to sense the flow in the air. Ever since he accidentally used the wind blade at the scene that day, his brain has been reminiscing about that strange feeling, like the wind listening to his call, like a force hidden in his body that has never been discovered. Concentrate and don't think about it. Hao Yu sat on a stone that was far away, holding a bottle of mineral water in his hand, and whispering with a little bit of speech, if you are stupid, you probably won't even be able to blow up a little wind. Junjie glared at him without any hesitation, but took a deep breath and closed his eyes again. He tried to recall his feelings about Yang Ming that day. His heart beat faster, and the air seemed to begin to gather in his palms, slowly forming an invisible spiral. He snatched his hand suddenly, and only heard a whoosh sound. A small wind blade swept through the air, rubbing the skin of the old pine tree and leaving a clean mark. Hey, it's not wrong. Hao Yu clapped his hands and clapped, his eyes narrowed with smiles. It's much stronger than yesterday, at least I didn't blow the leaves all over the sky this time. Junjie wiped the sweat from his head and smiled hard on the corner of his mouth, but he was not very satisfied. Although this wind blade is a bit powerful, it feels far from the time it faces against the Yang Ming flame that day. He knew that he must become stronger, especially when Yang Ming was keen on his greedy squad. Hao Yu, what level can I reach when I say that my ability is? Junjie sat down and asked with a heavy breath. I was able to hold Yang Ming's fire that day, but after practicing for a long time today, it was only that effect. Hao Yu snatched his shoulders and threw a bottle of water. I'm not a wind-based alien, how can I know your limits? However, according to the news I heard, the weak ability of the aliens in the campus is related to their personal will. The more you want to become stronger, the easier it is to break through your abilities. Of course, it depends on whether you dare to fight to the death. Try to the death. Junjie repeated the low voice, and his brain flashed through the look at the scene on the day. The concerned gaze made his heart warm and panic. He clenched his fists and made up his mind secretly. No matter how difficult it was, he had to prove himself at the sports meeting, not only to defeat Yang Ming, but also to protect her. Yeah, I heard a little news today. Hao Yu's temperament suddenly became serious and said in a low voice, Yang Ming, the guy who has been restless recently and is pulling people. He seemed to know that sports is a big opportunity and wanted to suppress all the extraordinary people in the competition, and be the king of this campus. Junjie's eyebrows, Laisho people? Who did he find? I heard that they were some senior men and had poor abilities, but I felt that they were in danger. Hao Yu touched his back brain with a slightly solemn expression. I guess Yang Ming is in a team and is preparing for a big move. You have to be careful, he will definitely be telling you. The handsome guy was slightly lit up, and there was a bit of coldness in his eyes. He is not afraid of Yang Ming being tough, but he is afraid of this guy playing tricks. After all, the secrets of the animos in the campus cannot be exposed. If Yang Ming used this to do minor actions, he would not have much experience. Okay, I understand. Junjie stood up and patted the dust on his body. Then I have to take the time to practice. Hao Yu, please continue to stare at Yang Ming's movement. Tell me the first time if you have any swearing. Pack it with me. Hao Yu compared an okay hand and immediately smiled and said, however, practicing ability is a serious matter. Don't forget your other sticking business. When will you give away the love book? If you don't act, Ching Ching will be chased away by others. Junjie's face turned red and replied in a bad mood, do you care? Practice your perception. In theory, Hao Yu's words hit Junjie's mind. The next day, he went to the library where Feng Qing often went to pretend to get a book, but actually wanted to find a chance to say a few words to her. The library was so quiet that she could hear the sound of flipping books. Feng Qing sat by the window, and the sun fell on her face, and her hair seemed to be dyed with golden light. Junjie's heart beats like a drum beat, and his palms are covered in sweat. He took a deep breath, plucked up his courage and walked over, and said in a low voice, Qing, have you been doing well recently? Jing Qing raised her head and smiled slightly. Her voice was so gentle that it made people's ears burst into tears. It's great, Junjie, why did you come to the library? Don't you usually practice running on the field? I just want to change the environment and learn something. Junjie said nonsense, and his brain became a group. He wanted to continue to say something, such as how she saw what she saw on the playground that day, but when he spoke, it turned out to be, well, do you have any recommended books? Ching Ching was stunned for a moment, then smiled and pointed to the novel on the table, saying, this is good, it's quite relaxing, you can try it. Oh, okay. Junjie's mechanical location was at the head. When he took the book, his finger accidentally touched her hand, and instantly shrank back like a touch. He thought he was stupid 100 times, and he could only say with a stern face, thank you, I'll go and have a look first. After saying that, he almost ran away in panic and didn't dare to go back. Jing Qing looked at his back, and there was a flash of confusion in her eyes. Then she lowered her head and continued to read the book, with a slight smile on the corner of her mouth. As soon as Junjie left the library, he took a hard photo of his brain, and was so upset that he wanted to find a place to diamond it. There is obviously such a good opportunity, why is it so tight? The book in his pocket was like a piece of potato with a burning hand, which made him breathless. He gritted his teeth and swore in his heart, no, I can't continue to be so anxious. At the sports meeting, I must let her see a different self. This stock is unwilling to turn into force, making Junjie's training harder in the future. After school every day, he and Hao Yu hid in the forest of trees behind the mountain, repeatedly practicing the control of the wind blade. From the beginning, he could only break the skin, and then he could accurately cut the fine branches, which was visible to the naked eye. Hao Yu is also not idle either. He often uses his perception ability to simulate dangerous situations, so that Junjie can use extraordinary energy under pressure. Be careful, left. Hao Yu suddenly shouted, and Junjie instinctively flashed his body from the side, and at the same time raised his hand and slapped a blade, and a wind blade directly hit the bush on the left. The shrub was cut in half and made a rustling sound. Although there was no real threat, Junjie's speed was obviously much faster than before. The reaction is good. Hao Yu pointed at the head and wiped his sweat. The power of your wind blade has also come up. I guess if you practice for a few days, you will be able to face Yang Ming's flames. Junjie gasped and grinned, that's not, I'm still waiting for the sports meeting to give him some color. However, Yang Ming obviously did not intend to give Junjie too much peace. One evening a few days later, Junjie returned from the back mountain training and passed by the alley behind the campus, and suddenly heard a sound of walking from behind. He looked back and saw 3 senior students in school uniforms walking towards him, smiling with ruthless smiles on his face. Yeah, isn't this a low-grade running prince? A guy in charge was holding a smoke in his mouth, his lingering words, I heard that you were quite crazy recently, how dare you challenge brother Yang Ming? Junjie stopped, and replied coldly, what's the matter between me and him? What's the matter with you? What's up to us? Haha, laugh. Another guy sneered and stepped forward, holding a baseball bat in his hand. Brother Yang Ming said, let us try your pounds and see if you're really as bad as you say. Junjie's heart sank and he slapped his eyes. There were no people in the alley, and these guys were obviously ready to come. He doesn't want to make things too big, but judging from the other party's struggle, he obviously doesn't plan to be ruthless. If you don't want to be beaten, just get away. Junjie was cold and secretly regulating the power of wind in his body, ready to respond at any time. Yeah, it's quite tough. The guy who was in charge snorted coldly, rushed up suddenly, and smashed his fist straight towards Junjie's face. Junjie flashed his body, and at the same time, he raised his hand and slapped it. A wind blade quietly swept across the other party's sleeves, leaving a whole hole. Bound. This guy really has two tricks. The man took a step back in surprise, his face blue. The other two guys were also stunned for a moment, but soon surrounded them again, and the baseball bat and iron tube in their hands smashed them mercilessly. Junjie bit his teeth tightly, avoided several times, and tried to counterattack with a wind blade. However, the three of them cooperated well, and even though his wind blade could force the other party to retreat, he could never completely resolve the battle. At this moment, a guy took advantage of his inattention and hit him hard on the back from the side. Be careful. Haoyu's voice suddenly came from the entrance of the alley. Junjie felt nervous and turned around instinctively, and at the same time, an unprecedented force burst out. Foam formed an invisible barrier around him, forcibly slamming the iron stick, and even shook the other side back. Is this ghost thing? The guy was so scared that he threw away all the sticks and turned around and ran away. The other two were also panicked and fled with each other, leaving a ruthless saying, "You wait for me, brother Yang Ming will not let you go." Junjie gasped heavily and stood firmly against the wall. That power shocked him. He looked down at his palm and murmured, "That's the barrier of wind?" Haoyu ran over, supported him, and took a frightened look in his language. "Fortunately, I felt that the danger had passed, otherwise you would be depressed. But, that move was so great that you broke through again. The handsome guys are a little biting, but there is not much joy in my heart." He knew that Yang Ming sent someone to try this time, obviously trying to find out his details. The days ahead will only become more and more dangerous. And sports are not only a competition, but also a battle that must be won. Haoyu, help me keep staring at Yang Ming. Junjie wiped his sweat, his eyes firmly as if he was like a thorn. No matter what small moves he did, I will let him be in full swing in the sports meeting. Haoyu patted his shoulder and grinned, "Don't worry, brothers are on standby anytime. But, don't just take care of your training skills, and there is no more chicken eggs beating around Ching Ching." Junjie didn't say anything, but just clenched his fists silently. Ching Ching's smile, Yang Ming's pick, and the secret hidden in the campus, all of this made him unable to breathe. But he knew that only by becoming stronger can one protect the person who wants to protect, and can one muster up the courage to hand the love letter to her. The night became darker, and the wind in the alley was filled with a hint of silence, as if it was a challenge for Junjie to come, and he was whispering lightly. The air in the campus became increasingly tighter with the movement, and there were training figures all over the field. The signs on the runway read "Youth is infinite, struggle to the end," and the horn repeatedly played the passionate march. Junjie stood by the dormitory window, looking at the hot scene below, holding a bottle of water in his hand, and a string in his heart seemed to be tightened. "Hey, Junjie, are you stupid again?" Haoyu pushed in, holding a sports tournament schedule in his hand, and a handsome smile on his face. "This is our opportunity. If you perform well in sports, you can not only slap Yang Ming's face, but also make Feng Qing look at him with admiration. You win." Junjie rolled his eyes and threw the water bottle back to the table. "It's easy to say. Yang Ming's guy is not a fuel-efficient light. You saw the last incident in the alley. He didn't take action directly, but sent someone to try it out. Maybe you would play some tricks in the sports club." Haoyu clicked his head. His expression was also serious, and sat on the bed to hang out the opening schedule. "So we have to have a plan. You see, the first day of the sports event was a field project, and the relay competition and long running were the main points. Yang Ming would definitely register these projects, intending to use his flame ability to secretly take advantage of it. If you can sign up to the same venue, directly face him, and when the venue is under pressure, you will win half of the energy. Junjie looked at the schedule with his head down, and tapped his fingers on the table. Relay game. Okay, I'll report this. Long Run also reported that my wind power is the most suitable speed competition. However, Yang Ming's flame ability is too extraordinary. As long as he directly takes action in the game, I need to have a right way. Isn't that simple? Hao Yu grinned, took out an old notebook from his pocket, and turned it on to Junjie. I have used my perception ability to figure it out over the past few days. There are several veterans in the campus who know the secrets of many strangers. Hearing that although the fire ability has strong attack power, the duration is limited. As long as you can hold Yang Ming and let him consume too much, the flame will weaken. By then, your wind blade will be decisive. Junjie's eyes lit up. He took the note and took a few more glances, and said, okay, this is a breakthrough. In the next few days, I will have to practice the barrier of wind. He can at least protect himself if he plays the game. Yes. Hao Yu slapped his thigh and said in a low voice afterwards, there's one more thing, that Qing was selected into the sports club this time and is responsible for logistics and order arrangements. I heard that she has been so busy that she can't even eat lunch lately. Do you want to take the opportunity to pay attention? She may be able to add some impression points. Junjie's face turned red and his mouth was hard. I don't have time to control these things. Let's solve Yang Ming first. Come on, don't be stubborn. Hao Yu smiled and slapped his head, stood up and patted his shoulder. But seriously, there are so many people during the sports event that you have to keep an eye on. Don't let Yang Ming's guy look for Yan Qing in trouble. This was like a thorn that penetrated Junjie's heart. He slighted his head and had a little more worry in his eyes. Jing Qing's gentle smile always made his heart sweet and panic. He didn't want her to be rolled into the conflict of the alien. In the next few days, Junjie spent almost all his spare time on training. After school every day, he and Hao Yu still hid in the forest of trees behind the mountains, repeatedly practicing the control of the wind blade and the wind barrier. His wind blade became more and more precise, and he could even produce 3 consecutive channels, which were powerful enough to cut off small branches, and the wind barrier also evolved from the initial rush to resist heavy attacks in a short time. Although he was exhausted and sweating profusely after every training, he always felt a little confident when he saw his progress. Junjie, you will definitely be shocked at the sports meeting at this speed. Hao Yu sat aside and gnawed on the apple. His language was full of awards. I guess Yang Ming would be shocked to see your sword, and his chin dropped to the ground. Junjie wiped his sweat and grinned, hope. But I always think that he won't compete with me in speed, so he will definitely have a backup plan. Don't worry, I'll help you stare. Hao Yu threw away the apple core, clapped his hands and stood up. Yeah, this afternoon, Feng Qing was busy setting up the competition venue. Do you want to go and have a look? Show your muscles and show your presence? Junjie glared at him without any worries, but his heart was moved. He hesitated for a moment, and still pointed, okay, go and have a look. The afternoon exercise was very popular. The students were busy pulling their clothes and moving tables. Feng Qing was wearing a light sportswear and clearing the materials on the track. She was hanging on the top of the magnitude with detailed sweat beads, and she was still smiling and talking to the people next to her. Junjie stood far away and watched. His heartbeat couldn't help but speed up, and his palms were covered in sweat. He wanted to walk over and help, but his feet seemed to be filled with a penis and he couldn't start. Hey, are you fucking me in a daze? Go! Hao Yu pushed him from behind and urged in a low voice, if you don't move, others will be in the first place. Junjie gritted his teeth and finally walked over with his head hard, pretending to ask casually, Qing, are you busy? Do you need help? When Xiao Qing turned over, she saw that it was him. Her eyes lit up and she smiled and said, Jun. You are here just in time. The tags here have not been moved yet. Can you help me lift them? No problem. Junjie hurriedly responded, rolled up his sleeves and went to move the tag. Although it was just a simple physical work, his heart was full of joy and could do things with Qing on his shoulders, and his air seemed to be a little sweeter. The two of them worked hard all the time. After Ching passed a bottle of water, she spoke softly, "Thank you, Junjie. I have been doing a lot of sports recently, and I am busy with my head. Fortunately, you are helping me." "It's okay, it's a small matter." Junjie took the water, slammed the head, and tried to find a question. "Well, have you ever encountered any trouble recently? There are many people in sports, and you will tell me any time if you have anything to do." Ching was stunned for a moment, then smiled and sniffed. "It's nothing wrong. It's just that some people don't cooperate with the work and speak a little bit. But I can handle it, don't worry." Junjie was a little bit too much and didn't ask anymore, but he always felt a little uneasy. He found out that the not very cooperative that Feng Qing said might not be that simple. However, the fact quickly proved that his uneasiness was not groundless. In the evening of that day, Junjie and Hao Yu finished their meals in the cafeteria and received news from a younger student, saying that young Qing was surrounded by several senior people near the equipment room, and the head seemed to be Yang Ming's subordinates. As soon as Junjie heard it, his brain buzzed, threw the chopsticks directly on the table, stood up and rushed out. "Hey, wait for me!" Hao Yu hurriedly followed, ran and shouted, "Don't move, figure out the situation first." "What else are you doing?" Junjie gritted his teeth, his voice filled with anger. "Yang Ming dares to move Qing, I will never let him go." The two rushed to the small open space behind the equipment room. Sure enough, they saw that Yang Qing was surrounded by 3 senior students. Her face was a little white, but she still straightened her back and said with a firm voice, "I said that there are regulations on the distribution of materials for the sports club, and you can't take them away at will." "Provisions? A joke." The guy in the lead sneered and moved forward. "We brother," Yang Ming said. "No one in this campus dares not to give him face. If you are not interested, don't blame us for being rude." Qing had a brow, and just wanted to say something else. Junjie had already knocked her over and protected her behind her, her eyes as cold as ice. "You try to see, who dares to touch her hair?" "Yeah, have you come to save May?" The guy looked at Junjie up and down and sneered. "You are the young boy who runs very fast, right? Why, dare to care about us? Stop talking." Junjie clenched his fists, and the air around him began to flow slightly, with a sense of pressure. "Roll, otherwise don't blame me for being rude." "Yeah, it's pretty crazy." Another gangster snorted coldly and winked at his companion. The 3 of them stepped forward at the same time and took the action. Yu Qing hurriedly grabbed Junjie and said in a low voice, "Junjie, don't be moved, they are many." "It's okay, you stand behind." Junjie was calm and winked at Hao Yu at the same time. Hao Yu was pleased and immediately stood beside Qing and said in a low voice, "Don't worry, I protect you, Junjie can handle it." The voice fell, and the 3 people on the opposite side had already rushed up, and the fists slammed at Junjie mercilessly. Junjie snorted coldly, raised his hand and slapped it. 3 wind blades shot out almost at the same time, accurately rubbing the corner of the other party's clothes, forcing them to retreat. "Boke, this guy really has 2 tricks." The guy who was in charge was startled and his face turned blue. "Brothers, don't hold on, give it to me." However, before they could take action, a low smile came from afar. "Ha, it's you, handsome." Junjie felt nervous and turned around and saw Yang Ming walking out of the shadow behind the equipment room. A sneer was hanging on the corner of his mouth, and there was still a flame jumping between his palms. He glanced at Qing, and there was a slight lick in his eyes. "Why, for the sake of a little girl, are you so anxious to jump out? It's really a thing." "Yang Ming, this matter has nothing to do with her." Junjie gritted his teeth, his voice filled with anger. "What are you doing? Tell me." "Come on you." "Okay." Yang Ming grinned and raised his hand suddenly. A fire snake rushed straight away, and came in a hot wave. All the air seemed to be ignited. Junjie instinctively flashed his body, and at the same time, he burst out with a wind barrier, barely resisting the fire snake striking, but his arms were still rubbed by the heat waves, leaving behind a red kidney. He bit his teeth tightly, raised his hand and slapped it, and 5 wind blades shot out, directly reaching Yang Ming's chest. Yang Ming snorted coldly, and with his hands, the flames formed a firewall in front of him, and forced the blade to slam the wind, but the impact force still made him take a step back, and his face changed slightly. It's not bad, it's much stronger than last time. Unfortunately, it's not enough. As he said, he suddenly rushed up, and the flame in his palm turned into a long whip, sucking towards Junjie hard. Junjie was busy avoiding, but the open space was small and the space was limited. His shoulders were still rubbed by the tip of the flame whip, and a burst of pain came in an instant, and his clothes were burned. June. Qing couldn't help but be surprised. Her face turned pale. Hao Yu hurriedly grabbed her and said in a low voice, "Don't go past, believe him." Junjie gritted his teeth and stood firmly, and quickly recalled the story Hao Yu had said before. Yang Ming's flame ability has a continuous time limit. As long as he was held back, he could find a breakthrough. He took a deep breath, forced the pain in his shoulders, raised his hand to summon the wind barrier again, and shouted to Hao Yu in a low voice, "Help me watch the time." Hao Yu pointed at Yang Ming with a sharp look, trying to use his perception to capture the other party's status. Yang Ming saw that Junjie could still fight back, and there was a flash of impatience in his eyes. The flame whip came again, and he sneered, "What, do you plan to snatch it hard? I see how long you can snatch it." Junjie didn't say anything, but just focused on defense and avoidance. The wind barrier blew the flames again and again. Although he was shocked and blood was stormed every time, he gritted his teeth and held on. The wound on his shoulder was getting more and more painful, and the sweat mixed with blood slid down, but the firmness in his eyes was not diminished at all. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Time passed slowly in the confrontation. Yang Ming's flame attack began to weaken, and the power of the fire whip was not as strong as before, and the scope of the firewall was reduced by a few points. Hao Yu's eyes lit up and he shouted in a low voice, "June, now! His power is almost limiting." Junjie was shocked. He grabbed this moment and suddenly burst out his strength. The power of the wind formed a small spiral around him, and rolled towards Yang Mingshi with countless small wind blades. Yang Ming's face changed drastically, and he reluctantly lifted a firewall, but the flames were almost transparent. The wind blade directly teared open the guard and rubbed his arm over, leaving a blood mark. "Don't die!" Yang Ming gritted his teeth and stepped back, covering his arms, his eyes filled with coldness. "You're leaving today, Junjie. At the sports meeting, I'll let you know what real hope is." After saying that, he glared at Junjie fiercely, turned around and quickly left with his subordinates, leaving behind a messy open space. Junjie held his knees, gasping for breath. The wound on his shoulders was so painful, and his head was covered with cold sweat. "June, are you okay?" Jade Qing came over, with a crying voice in her voice, and her eyes were red at his wounds. "What's going on?" "You just..." "It's okay, little hurt." Junjie reluctantly smiled, trying to reassure her, but Qing's eyes clearly filled with grief and doubt. He knew that some things could not be stopped, but now it was obviously not the time to explain. "Go back first and find a place to deal with the injury." Hao Yu held Junjie and said to Qing in a low voice, "We will explain this matter, but don't ask now, can you do it?" Qing bit her lip, hesitated for a moment, and finally pointed. She held the other side of the handsome guy, and the three of them slowly left the open space. Under the night sky, the campus looked particularly peaceful and hidden more winds. Back in the dormitory, Hao Yu brought the medical box to help Junjie deal with the wound on his shoulders. He whispered, "You've been too hard just now. Yang Ming's flame is not something you can play with. However, we can still find his bottom. His flame has time limit. If you go on the next exercise, as long as you drag it for a while, you will definitely be able to crush him." Junjie slighted his head, gritted his teeth and endured the pain, and his voice was low, "I know. But today's incident still made me angry. He dared to swear Qing, and I will never let him go. Don't worry, sports will be your stage." Hao Yu patted his shoulder and said in a low voice afterwards, "However, Qing saw too many things today, so you have to think about how to explain them to her. You can't keep silence, right?" Junjie was silent, and his brain became a group. The worried look of Feng Qing snatched her heart like a knife. He knew that the secret of the alien had to be faced long ago, but how to open her mouth and how to accept her was so painful that he had a headache. It was late at night, and the moonlight outside the dormitory window was cold. Junjie leaned against the bed, holding the unsent book in his hand, his eyes filled with complexity. The movement will get closer and closer, Yang Ming's threat, Qing Qing's doubts, and his own growth. All of this is like a rain of rain that may swallow him up at any time. But he knew that no matter what, he had to stand up to protect the people he wanted to protect and to become his true self. The opening ceremony of the sports club was opened hotly at the campus operation. The sky was as blue as if it had just been washed. The colorful flags were playing the sensation in the wind, and the students' shouts were heard one after another. Junjie stood in the lower-aged square, wearing a clean sportswear. His palms were slightly sweating, and his eyes were unconsciously swept towards the audience, trying to find Yan Qing's figure. Since the last time in the equipment room, the atmosphere between him and Qing Qing was somewhat subtle. Although she no longer asked about extraordinary things, her double doubtful eyes always made him feel panicked. "Hey, Junjie, what are you tight?" How you stood beside him, holding a lollipop in his mouth, smiling so hard that his face was irritated. "Today is your main venue. Yang Ming is staring at you in the senior square. Are you ready to be very good at it?" Junjie looked at Hao Yu with his eyes and indeed saw Yang Ming in the senior Fang Yan. The guy was wearing a black sports vest, the muscle lines on his arms were clearly marked, a sneer was hanging from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were locked on Junjie, like a leopard staring at a basketball. Junjie's heart sank, but on the surface he was still dressed without saying anything, and he hummed lightly, "Look, today I let him know what regret is. I ambitious." Hao Yu patted his shoulder and said in a low voice afterwards, "But remember, the extraordinary energy must be hidden in the competition, so that ordinary students can see it. Your wind power is the most suitable for speed and control. If you use it well, no one can see the breaking point." The handsome guys are pointing their heads, and the brain has already started to calculate the strategy for the next game. He reported 2 projects, relay competition and long-running competition, especially relay competitions, and heard that Yang Ming also reported it, and he was still a pressure player in the senior team. This competition was definitely the first time they had a head-on dance. After the opening ceremony, the competition officially began. There was a lot of noise at the scene, and the runway was surrounded by students cheering for help, and the atmosphere was as hot as if a fire was ignited. Junjie's first project was long run. Although he was not directly confronting Yang Ming, he knew that this was the first step to show his strength and also an opportunity for Yang Qing to see his efforts. On the starting line, Junjie took a deep breath, glanced over the audience, and finally saw Feng Qing in the organization. She was wearing a white sportswear and holding a font board in her hand. She was discussing something with her classmates next to her, and occasionally looked up at the track. Junjie's heart beats faster, he silently clenched his fists, and secretly swore in his heart, "I must win this competition." With the referee's gun sounding, the long-running competition begins. Junjie was not in a hurry at first, staying in the middle position, and following most of the team smoothly. Although his wind power could explode at a speed, in order not to attract doubts, he deliberately controlled it and only leveraged the force in every step, making his pace look light and flowing. After a few rounds, the picker in front began to show fatigue, his breathing became rapid, and his speed slowed down. However, Junjie seemed to be weak, his eyes were focused, and his pace was still stable. "This kid is running too stable, right?" Several students on the track couldn't help but argue, "It doesn't look like there's any explosive power, but why are you just not tired?" "Yes, it's like a swaying, and there's no sound when you run." Another person answered, his eyes full of surprise. Junjie heard these comments and slided on the corner of his mouth. He knew that this was exactly the effect he wanted, using the power of wind to hide in ordinary appearances, not only to be eye-catching, but also to be able to keep the opponent stable in stress. In the last 2 laps, he finally started to accelerate, as if he was pushed forward by the wind, easily surpassing the several players ahead, and finally crossing the final line with the first place. The whole scene burst into tears, and Junjie gasped heavily, wiped the sweat from his head, looked up, and Ching was smiling and applauding at him, with a light flashing in her eyes. He felt warm in his heart, and he wanted to go over and say something, but he heard a cold snorting from a distance. "You're running well, you're a lower class." Yang Ming stood in the rest area of the senior, holding his hands in his chest, and his language was full of picking. "But, what's the small project like for long-distance running? Some people compete with me in the relay game." Junjie turned around and replied coldly, "Don't worry, I will convince you in the relay game." Yang Ming sneered and said nothing, but the sparks in his eyes were almost burning. Junjie ignored him and turned to a lower-level rest area. Hao Yu was already waiting there, giving him a thumbs up. "Awesome, Junjie. This speed is controlled like a teaching book, and I can't even tell that you are using extraordinary energy. Please behave." Junjie took a bottle of water, took a sip, and said in a low voice, "You have heard that Yang Ming just now. The relay game is the key. I have to think about how to use the wind blade battle to force him to expose the crack." Hao Yu pointed and said in a low voice, "I have observed Yang Ming's competition. He likes to use his flame ability to secretly accelerate in the final sprint. Although ordinary people can't see it, the hot waves will affect the flow of air around them. You can sense this with the power of wind, and then use the wind blade to cut off his rhythm and force him to fight hard." Junjie's eyes lit up, and the war was quickly outlined in his brain. He knew that the relay race not only tested personal speed, but also tested team cooperation and combat operation. If he could hit Yang Ming with the last shot and use a wind blade to interfere with his flame, he might be able to directly suppress him. The afternoon relay race arrived soon, and the atmosphere on the field was even more intense than in the morning. The two sides of the track were filled with students, and the shouts and cheers almost made their ears shake. As the fourth player of the lower-class team, Junjie stood on the runway waiting for the handover, his eyes tightly locked on the movements of the teammates in front. The fourth player of the senior team was Yang Ming. He stood on the opposite track, with a sneer on the corner of his mouth, and there seemed to be a flash of fire between his fingers. "June, stay calm." Hao Yu reminded in a low voice from the side. "I felt a dangerous breath on Yang Ming, and he might not intend to hide it. You have to be careful not to let him move directly." The handsome guy slighted his head, took a deep breath, and repeatedly simulated the scene of the next confrontation in his brain. With the start of the competition, the lower and upper class teams started almost at the same time. The handover of the first 3 balls was unusually fierce, and the two teams bit tightly, with a gap of only a few meters. When the teammates of the third ball finally rushed to Junjie and handed him the baton, Yang Ming also took the baton at the same time, and the two almost ran away shoulder to shoulder. "Come on, Junjie, let me see how many pounds you have." Yang Ming growled, and his feet accelerated suddenly, and a wave of heat came from the air, as if flames were igniting in the dark. His speed instantly opened a short distance, and the senior student on the runway burst into tears. Junjie bit his teeth tightly and did not rush to chase him, but focused on sensing the airflow around him. Sure enough, the heat waves around Yang Ming's body affected the airflow and formed a weak circle of waves. He sniffed at the corner of his mouth and said in a low voice, "I found you." He suddenly adjusted the power of the wind, and it seemed to be lifted by an invisible wind under his feet. His speed suddenly increased, and his distance from Yang Ming was quickly shortened. At the same time, he quietly condensed a small wind blade and accurately cut towards the heat waves under Yang Ming's feet. He could only hear a whoosh sound. The waves in the air were instantly interrupted. Yang Ming's speed clearly showed up, and his pace was even a little stumbled. "What?" Yang Ming's face changed and he glared at Junjie fiercely, obviously realizing that his flame ability was being disturbed. He gritted his teeth and cut, and with his palm, the heat wave exploded again, trying to accelerate with stronger flames, but Junjie had already prepared to shoot out 2 blades, accurately cutting off the heat wave flow, forcing Yang Ming to slow down and be pulled back to the same running line. The audience on the runway was stunned. They never expected that the lower-level Junjie could fight so fiercely with the higher-level Yang Ming, and their voices and shocks were almost overwhelming. Junjie bit his teeth tightly, and his head was covered with sweat. The continuous use of wind power made him consume a lot of energy, but he knew that he could never retreat now. "Yang Ming, I won't lose this game." Junjie growled and burst out the last force. The wind power formed an invisible thrust under his feet, increasing his speed a little further, and almost shoulder to shoulder with Yang Ming. Yang Ming's face was so blue, it was obvious that Junjie could reach this point. He gritted his teeth and slapped his hand, and a small whip of flame quietly flicked out, trying to interfere with Junjie's pace at the last moment. However, Junjie had already been on guard, and the wind barrier opened instantly, holding the impact of the flame whip, while keeping pace, and simultaneously pushing through the final line with Yang Ming. The referee was stunned for a moment and later announced the result of the game a draw. The two teams won the first place at the same time, and unprecedented shouts burst out at the scene, and the students discussed the shocking contest. Junjie gasped heavily, holding his knees, sweat dripping down his face, but his eyes were full of certainty. He knew that this draw was not only a confrontation in speed, but also a significant amount of extraordinary combat. He successfully tied Yang Ming and had already won the first step. "Junjie, you're so awesome." How you rushed over and hugged him, smiling so hard that his eyes narrowed. A few blades were clean and neat. Yang Ming was so angry that his teeth were about to be broken. Junjie smiled strongly and looked up. Yang Ming was standing far away, his face as dark as the sky before the rain. He snorted coldly and said in a low voice, "You are leaving this time, but in the game, I will let you know what real hope is. I'll be with you anytime." Junjie looked straight into his eyes, never retracting. Yang Ming sneered and turned away, but there was a deeper sneer in his eyes. "June, you're pretty fucked." A gentle voice suddenly came from the side. June's heart was shocked. When she turned around, she saw that Yang Qing was standing on the track, holding a bottle of water in her hand, and walked towards him with a smile. Her eyes were bright, as if there were stars hiding, which made Junjie's heart beat faster in an instant. "Thank you. Thank you." Junjie took the water and accidentally touched her hand. His face suddenly turned red, and he said it was unsuccessful. "Well, did you see the competition?" "Of course I saw it." Qing smiled and pointed her head. Her lingerie was full of awards. "You ran too hard. When I stabbed in the end, I thought you were going to lose. I didn't expect you to tie it." "That's great." Junjie slapped his head, couldn't help but swell the corners of his mouth, and his heart felt as sweet as honey. He wanted to say something, such as telling her why she was so desperate, but when he said that he still turned into, "It's nothing, it's just. I don't want to lose." Yu Qing smiled and didn't say anything, but there was a little more attention in her eyes. Junjie looked at her back, and a warm current surged in his heart, and at the same time he became more determined. No matter what Yang Ming played, he had to win the game to the end, not only for himself, but also for Qing to see his growth. However, the joy didn't last long. Hao Yu's face suddenly became solemn, and he whispered in Junjie's ears, "Don't be too excited too early," and I just felt a strong sense of danger from Yang Ming. He probably won't use the means or even the risk of exposing his anomalies, and will directly attack you. The handsome guy clenched his fists and asked in a low voice, "Can you sense what the specific one is?" "It's not clear in detail, but that kind of pressure is very strong, stronger than in the alleys and equipment rooms before." Hao Yu slammed his head, his eyes full of worry. "I guess he might be doing some big moves, or pulling other exotics to help. You have to prepare mentally, and the game won't be as simple as it is today." Junjie was silent, and his brain was moving quickly. Yang Ming's flame ability is already tricky. If he adds other helpers, or uses his ultimate move without taking everything, it will be a huge threat to him. But he knew that retrenchment was definitely not an option. The sports competition was not only a competition, but also a battle in the name of the campus king and a key battle for him to protect Yan Qing. "Okay, I understand." Junjie patted Hao Yu's shoulder and said calmly, "No matter what kind of flowers he plays, I will take it. How you keep watching me, tell me the first time if you have any abnormalities. Don't worry, brothers are on standby anytime. How you grinned, but there was still a hint of worry in his eyes. As night fell, the first day of the sports competition ended, the lights in the campus lighted up, and the students dispersed in 2 or 3 places, and there were only a few on-duty organization members left at the venue to pack up their things. Junjie stood alone on the runway, looking at the empty field, holding the bottle of water given by Qingqing in his hand, and recalling today's competition repeatedly in his brain. The tie in the relay game made him show his strength in front of the whole school for the first time, and also made him closer to the king statement. But he knew that this was just the beginning. Yang Ming's threat was still at the back, and the game was the real test. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and tried to sense the power of wind in his body. The power seemed to hear his call, and it flowed lightly around him, bringing a sense of urgency. Yang Ming, no matter what you are preparing for, I will not retreat. Junjie said in a low voice, and a flame ignited in his eyes. In the sports conference's decision, I will let you know who is the real king. The voice was light, like a whisper for his determination. The campus under the night was hidden in more secrets and challenges, waiting for him to decide the world and the game. On the second day of the sports meeting, the atmosphere at the campus was even hotter than on the first day, and the air was filled with the smell of tension and expectation. The sun was high in the sky, the colorful flags were flying in the wind, and the 2 sides of the runway filled the students, shouting and cheering sounds one after another, almost lighting up the entire campus. Junjie stood in the rest area of the lower grade, wearing a clean blue-white sportswear. His palms were slightly sweating, and his eyes were abnormally calm. Today is the day of the sports club, and it is also the final time for him and Yang Ming to fight. Junjie, are you ready? How you stood beside him, holding a bottle of water in his hand, and a slight sensation in his language. I just felt it again. The danger on that guy Yang Ming was stronger than yesterday. I guess he would not care about everything today. You have to be careful not to let him catch the broken bit. The handsome guy was slightly pointed, his eyes were locked far away on Yang Ming, who was in the senior rest area. The guy was wearing a black sportswear, holding his chest with both hands, a sneer on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of picking, as if he had already prepared a big battle. Several senior students surrounded him and said something in a low voice. Junjie thought that those people might be the helpers how you mentioned earlier. Don't worry, no matter what kind of flowers he plays, I will take it. Junjie said in a low voice, clenching his fist. The wind power inside his body seemed to feel his determination and began to flow slightly. Today, I not only want to win, but also want to make him convinced. How you patted his shoulder and grinned, ambition. But remember, extraordinary things cannot be seen by ordinary students. Your power of wind must be used in a vague way, so don't be too arrogant. I know. Junjie responded, and his eyes unconsciously swept towards the audience's organizational position. Qingqing was wearing a white sportswear and holding a font board in her hand. She was arranging the logistics work of the competition with several classmates. The sun fell on her face, and her smile was so gentle that it made people's heart beat faster. Junjie took a deep breath and secretly swore in his heart, no matter how difficult it is, we must protect her today. The project of the competition is the 4x400-meter relay race, which is not only the focus of the sports club, but also the focus of the whole school. Junjie and Yang Ming are the 4th bats of the lower and upper class teams respectively, which means they will directly fight with the last bat. The competition has not yet begun, and the atmosphere on the field has been so tight that it can almost smell the flaming smell. The students have discussed and guessed who can win the final champion. I heard that the senior Yang Ming ran like the rockets, and yesterday's competition was simply not against him, a student said excitedly on the side of the track. Come on, the younger Junjie is not bad either. He ran first yesterday and tied Yang Ming in the relay game. I might be upset today. Another person responded, his eyes full of expectations. These comments came to Junjie's ears, and he just smiled slightly and said nothing. How you came over and reminded in a low voice, don't worry about what they said, focus on the game. Yang Ming will definitely use his ultimate move in the last shot. You have to keep some action and don't try your best from the beginning. The handsome guy clicked his head, closed his eyes and took a deep breath, and repeatedly simulated the competition scene in his brain. His wind power is the most suitable for speed and control. As long as he breaks the wind blade or wind barrier in the end, he can fight against Yang Ming's rhythm and even directly suppress his flames. But he also knew that Yang Ming would not compete in real life. The danger that how you felt yesterday made him feel uneasy. With the referee's whistle, the relay game officially began. The first player was like an arrow from the string. The lower and higher level teams started at almost the same time. They bit tightly when handing over the baton, and the gap was no more than a few steps. The shouts on the playground were rising and falling, and the atmosphere was as hot as boiling water. The handover between the second and third balls was still fierce. When the teammates of the third ball finally rushed to Junjie and handed the baton to him, the third ball of the senior team also handed over to Yang Ming almost at the same time. The two of them looked at each other and sparks seemed to be sparking from the air, and they rushed out at the same time. "Come on, Junjie, today's your death." Yang Ming growled, and his feet accelerated suddenly. A wave of heat came from the air, as if flames were ignited in the dark. His speed instantly opened a short distance, and the senior student on the runway burst into tears. Junjie bit his teeth tightly and did not rush to chase him, but focused on sensing the airflow around him. Sure enough, the heat waves around Yang Ming's body affected the airflow and formed a weak circle of waves. He squirted at the corner of his mouth and said in a low voice, "I'm here again, let's see how I can break you." He slightly adjusted the power of the wind, and it seemed to be lifted by an invisible wind under his feet. His speed suddenly increased, and his distance from Yang Ming was quickly shortened. At the same time, he quietly condensed a small wind blade and accurately cut towards the heat waves under Yang Ming's feet. He could only hear a whoosh sound. The waves in the air were instantly interrupted. Yang Ming's speed clearly showed up, and his pace was even a little stumbled. "Diet, this is another move." Yang Ming's face changed and he glared at Junjie fiercely, obviously realizing that his flame ability was being disturbed. He gritted his teeth and cut, and with his palm, the heat wave exploded again, trying to accelerate with stronger flames, but Junjie had already prepared to shoot out two blades, accurately cutting off the heat wave flow, forcing Yang Ming to slow down and be pulled back to the same running line. The audience on the runway was stunned. They never expected that the lower-level Junjie could fight so fiercely with the higher-level Yang Ming, and their voices and shocks were almost overwhelming. Junjie bit his teeth tightly, and his head was covered with sweat. The continuous use of wind power made him consume a lot of energy, but he knew that he could never retreat now. However, just as the two were about to enter the last 100 meters of sprint, Yang Ming's eyes suddenly became cold. He sneered in a low voice, "June, do you think you can win me like this? Be a dream." As he said, he suddenly slapped his hand, and a small whip of flame quietly shook it out, thrusting straight towards Junjie's legs. Although the flame was deliberately suppressed very little and ordinary people could not see abnormality, the heat wave made Junjie feel tight. He instinctively flashed his body, and at the same time, he burst out the barrier of the wind, barely holding the impact of the flame whip, but his pace was still hit for half a beat, and his speed was instantly slowing down. "Yang Ming, are you crazy?" Junjie roared angrily, but he didn't expect that the other party would directly use his extraordinary energy to attack in front of everyone. He gritted his teeth and calmed down and tried to reverse the plan, but Yang Ming did not give him any chance. He followed several small flame whips to throw out, each of which accurately interfered with Junjie's rhythm, forcing him to distract himself from defending. "Crazy? Ha, I just want to win." Yang Ming grinned, his eyes full of crazy. "The only king in this campus is me. Whoever takes the way, whoever has to pay for it." Junjie's heart sank, and he realized that Yang Ming no longer planned to hide his strange power. He bit his teeth tightly, and the barrier of the wind continued to spread, and he forced several flame whips to slap, but his physical strength was getting bigger and bigger, and the old wound on his shoulders was intimately painful. Sweat dripped down his face, and his eyes were a little blurred. How you, on the runway, was anxious and cursed, this guy really doesn't have a face. Even though so many people dare to take ruthlessness. He tried to use his perception ability to capture Yang Ming's state, and at the same time shouted to Junjie, Junjie, hold him down. His flames won't last long. The handsome guy pointed his head, urging the power of the explosion, accelerated again under his feet, trying to narrow the distance with Yang Ming. However, Yang Ming obviously had a good preparation. He suddenly turned his head, his eyes widened beyond Junjie, locked onto Ching on the audience, and a cold smile came out from the corner of his mouth. Junjie, don't you care about that little girl? If I accidentally missed and let the flames burn to the audience, what would you say? This was like a ray of lightning struck Junjie's heart. He turned his head and saw that Yang Qing was standing by the audience, with a worried expression on her face, and she was completely unaware of Yang Ming's threat. His heartbeat almost stopped, and his anger instantly rushes to his brain, gritting his teeth and shouting, Yang Ming, if you dare to move her, I will make you regret living. Ha, it depends on whether you have the ability. Yang Ming laughed loudly, raised his hand suddenly, and a larger whip of flame was thrown out. This time the target was no longer Junjie, but the audience's audience, with the heat storm, and the air seemed to be ignited. No! Junjie's eyes were red, and there was only one thought in his brain, to protect his sunshine. He suddenly burst out the power of his body. The power of the wind formed an unprecedented spiral around him. His speed instantly increased to the extreme limit, and it almost hit Yang Ming's side in the blink of an eye. At the same time, he raised his hand and slapped out, cutting out the trunk of the flame whip, forcing the heat wave to change direction, and scattered the audience. The whole scene was shocked. The students thought it was just an unexpected smoke in the game. The discussion was discussed, but Junjie could no longer take these. His heart beats like a drumbeat, and his eyes were locked on Ching. It was only after seeing her that it was okay that he relaxed a little. However, the distraction at this moment made Yang Ming seize the opportunity. Go to die. Yang Ming growled, and the flames burst out in his palm, forming a huge fire snake, which straightened his chest. The distance was too close, and Junjie almost couldn't react. The wind barrier was barely widened, but he was still shocked by the fire snake's striking force and took a few steps back. A blood spilled out of the corner of his mouth, and a soft knee was almost kneeling to the ground. June. Hao Yu and Ching were both shocked, their voices filled with anxiety. Ching did not obey the obstacles of others, but rushed to the track, looking at him with red eyes, as if she was about to cry at any time. Junjie bit his teeth tightly, stood up and wiped away the blood from the corner of his mouth, and an unprecedented flame ignited in his eyes. He looked at Ching, his voice was quiet and determined, I'm fine, I won't let anyone hurt you. This sentence seemed to ignite a certain force in his body, and the power of wind began to rush wildly, as if he heard his roar, forming an increasingly strong whirlwind around him. Junjie closed his eyes, and his brain recalled the training of this period, Hao Yu's encouragement, Feng Qing's smile, and Yang Ming's threat. Everything turned into an unyielding will, pushing his wind power to break through the limit. Yang Ming, this competition is over. Junjie suddenly opened his eyes, and the whirlwind around him exploded in an instant, forming a huge wind blade. Invisible wind blades spiraled in the air, rolling towards Yang Ming with a pressured air. The air was torn apart, and the colorful flags on the runway were blown into a striking sound. Yang Ming's face changed drastically, and he quickly pulled up a firewall to try to resist the wind blade storm, but the flames were quickly torn apart under the storm. He himself was shocked by the impact and retreated, and several small blood marks appeared on his arm in an instant. He gritted his teeth and cut, trying to explode again with a flame reversal, but the pressure of the wind blade storm was too strong, and his heat wave was cut off as soon as it formed, and he could not handle it at all. How is this possible? Yang Ming finally showed a terror, his footsteps stumbled, and his speed was completely suppressed. Junjie took advantage of the opportunity to accelerate, and the power of wind supported him toward the end like an arrow, leaving Yang Ming behind for a few meters. The final line is so close that the handsome guy bit his teeth and stormed the threat of the storm. At the end, the referee's whistle sounded, and the lower-level team won the championship with absolute advantage. The sound of deafening cries broke out in the whole field, and the students stood up to applaud, marveling at the intense and incredible competition. Junjie! Junjie! The younger students came over and lifted him up high. How you couldn't hold his mouth even more. He slapped him hard and patted him on the shoulder. You are so awesome. This wind blade is stormy and is simply a big killer. Yang Ming was stunned. Junjie gasped heavily and smiled hard. His eyes crossed the crowd and locked onto Qing Qing on the side of the runway. She was walking towards him, her eyes flashing with a light and a smile of relief. Junjie's heartbeat accelerated, and he swept away the crowd. He walked to her and said in a low voice, "Ying Qing, are you okay? Did you scare you just now?" Yu Qing shook her head and her voice was choked. "I'm fine, but I'm very worried when I see you being injured." "Junjie, thank you for protecting me." This sentence made Junjie feel warm. He slapped his head, his face was slightly red. He just wanted to say something, but he heard a cold snorting from a distance. Yang Ming stood on the other side of the runway, covering the wound on his arm. His face was blue, and his eyes were full of unwillingness. "June, you are leaving today. But this matter is not over. I will take it back to the king of the campus very soon." Junjie replied coldly, "I will accompany you any time. But next time I dare to move Qingqing, I will not hold back." Yang Ming gritted his teeth, glared at him fiercely, then turned away, his back filled with wolves. Junjie looked at his back and finally relaxed his breath, and turned to Haoyu and said in a low voice, "Help me stare at it. His personality is probably not going to be the case." "Don't worry, hand it over to me." Haoyu compared the okay hand and then smiled and reiterated, "But now, should you do some serious business? For example, send that love book out?" Junjie's face turned red and glared at him without any good temper, but his heart was moved. He looked at Qing Qing with his head down, and plucked up his courage and said, "Qing Qing, the competition is over. Is there something I want to tell you? Can you find a peaceful place to talk about?" Qing Qing was stunned for a moment, then smiled and pointed, "Okay, let's have a small forest behind the scene, there are few people there." Junjie's heart beat like a drum, and he walked towards the small forest with a little head. The sunlight shines down through the leaves, and the wind blows lightly, bringing a touch of radiance. He took a deep breath and finally took out the letter from his pocket that he had never sent for half a year. He trembled his hand to her and said in a low voice, "Ying Qing, I have always wanted to give it to you. I'll say it after reading it, okay?" Feng Qing took the envelope, and saw a flash of surprise in her eyes. Then she lowered her head and opened it and read it carefully. Junjie stood aside, feeling like a rabbit was in her heart, so tight that she could hardly see her expression. As time had been like a lifetime, Qing Qing finally raised her head, her face was slightly red, and her voice was soft. "June, thank you. I'm very moved." Junjie was stunned for a moment, then grinned, and it seemed like a big stone was put down in his heart. He knew that this was just the beginning, the secret of the extraordinary. The campus's disputes and many unsolved thoughts were waiting for him, but at this moment, with the Qing Smith smile and the cheers of the whole school, he had become the king of the campus and a better self. The voice is light, like a sensational verb for his sporting rage, and the hustle and bustle of sports is still continuing. The noise of the sports club dissipated in the sunset, and the crowds at the campus were slowly dispersing, leaving only a few on-duty student members packing up the siding and tables and chairs. The air still retains the heat of the competition, and the colorful flags sway in the slightest wind, as if the first sentence of this grand youthful madness was drawn. Junjie stood beside the small tree forest, holding the envelope of the book he had just handed to Wei Qing in his hand. Although the letter had been opened and read by her, his heart was still as fast as a drum beat, and his breathing was a little uneasy. Xiao Qing looked at the letter with his head low, and the sun shone through the gaps of the leaves on her face, reflecting a faint redness. Her fingers were gently swept through the words on the paper, and her eyes were as gentle as the lake in spring, making Junjie unable to help but hold his breath. Time seemed to be quiet, and the handsome men formed a group, but they didn't dare to break the tranquility of this moment. He wanted to ask her what she thought, but when he spoke, he became silent again. Finally, Ching raised her head, a clean smile appeared on the corner of her mouth, and her voice was light and clear. June, thank you. I was very moved by this letter. I didn't expect that you had so much talk in your heart and never said it. Junjie slammed his brain and his face was as red as a ripe apple. He stammered and said, I'm just afraid you don't like it, so I never dared to give it to you. Today's sports club won, and I felt that I finally had a little courage, so. Follower. Ching smiled lightly, and there was a little more anger in her eyes. You don't have to win any competition to prove yourself. I've long thought you were so bad. Whether it's the hard work of running or the determination that just protects everyone. This was like a warm current pouring into Junjie's heart. He was stunned for a moment, then grinned, and the tightness instantly dissipated for most of the time. He said in a low voice, then, don't you blame me for slandering you before, right? Actually, I haven't told you some things clearly, such as those strange phenomena during today's competition. Ching slammed her head and gently slammed him. I know there are some things you are not easy to explain, but I believe you will not harm others. I was surprised just now, but seeing you so desperately protecting everyone, I thought that no matter what secret you have, it was all for the best. I don't ask, when do you want to say, when do I hear it? Junjie was shocked, and he didn't expect that Yang Qing would trust him so much. He took a deep breath, finally made up his mind and said in a low voice, in fact, I have a special ability to control the wind. During today's competition, I used this ability to fight Yang Ming, and I also protected you in the equipment room before, because of this ability. He said, and carefully observed Feng Qing's expression, for fear that she would show a look of shock or repulsion. However, Jing Qing only had a slightly narrowed eyes, and then she clicked a little. Her voice was still gentle. Although it sounds incredible, I believe you. Junjie, no matter what ability you have, I think you are a trustworthy person. This sentence made the last thought in Junjie's heart disappear. He couldn't help laughing, as if he had removed a large stone. Thank you, Ching. I feel more happy to hear you. Xiao Qing's face turned red. She lowered her head and smiled, then carefully put the letter in her pocket, and said in a low voice, then, we will still be friends in the future, right? Of course. Junjie was busy, and then he plucked up his courage and said, but, if possible, I hope, it can be more than just a friend. As soon as this was said, the air seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Junjie's heart beat so much that it was about to pop out of his chest. He quickly explained, I don't mean anything, I just want to talk to you more, understand you, and let you understand me. Ching was stunned for a moment, then chuckled, and said, okay, then let's talk more in the future. This simple sentence makes the heart of handsome guy feel like a flower is blooming. He knew that this was just the germination of feelings and there was still a long way to go in the future, but at this moment, with the promise of Ching, he already felt that he was the happiest person in the school. Hey, Junjie, what are you talking about? You smile like you stole honey? Hao Yu's voice suddenly came from a distance, breaking the calm atmosphere in the small tree forest. Junjie glared at him without any worries, and couldn't help laughing. Do you care? Don't worry about it if you have nothing to do. Yi, are you still shy? Hao Yu laughed, and went to Ying Qing, pretending to be honest. Yi Qing, I tell you, it's not easy for Junjie. In order to write this letter, I have been writing this letter for so many nights, and my words are almost copied into a book by the legalists. You have to cherish it. Hao Yu. Junjie gritted his teeth and wanted to kick him away. Ching was amused and covered her mouth and smiled lightly. Don't worry, I will save this letter. Hao Yu saw the situation and finally stopped talking, and patted Junjie's shoulder. Okay, no more. Speaking of serious matters, the Student Association announced the final result of the Sports Association. You were evaluated as the MVP of this Sports Association, the king recognized by the whole school. Now, no one in the campus dares to disobey you. Junjie was stunned for a moment, then smiled. I don't care if the king is not a king. As long as I can protect the person I want to protect, this game will be worth it. I have a sense of enlightenment. How you gave a thumbs up, and then his words changed, and he said in a low voice. However, Yang Ming was a little calm. After the game, he did not speak ruthlessly like before, but instead took the initiative to find a few senior extraordinary people, saying that he wanted to talk to you. Do you think this guy is really convinced, or is he holding back his evil again? The handsome eyebrows quickly turned a few circles in his brain. He knew that Yang Ming's personality was very arrogant and he would definitely not be willing to give up after the game, but in today's game, he was already under the storm of wind and storm, and he should not dare to act rashly in a short time. Thinking of this, he said in a low voice, "Let's take a look first. If he really wants to talk, I don't mind giving him an opportunity. After all, there are too many conflicts between the extraordinary people in the campus, which is not good for anyone. Okay, then I'll arrange a time for you to chat with you when you have no one." How you pointed at the head and then grinned, "But, I'll give you a wish now. The sports meeting has won and the love book has been given. We have to have a good time." Junjie didn't have time to reply. How you had already dragged him and Feng Qing out of the campus, shouting, "Let's go, go to the milk tea shop at the entrance of the school gate, I'll ask for a visit. I won't be drunk today." "Who's drunk with you?" Junjie complained without any hesitation, but he still followed him. Qing Qing smiled lightly from the side, and the three of them walked on the campus path under the sun, with the air full of youth. A few days later, in a remote open space behind the campus, Junjie saw Yang Ming as if he had made a date. As the sun sets, the orange light is radiating on the grass. Yang Ming is wearing a black sportswear and standing against an old pine tree. Although his face is still a little heavy, his eyes are less angry and more complicated. He didn't bring any followers around him, and it was obvious that he really planned to talk alone. "Come?" Yang Ming raised his head, his voice was low, and he carried a silk slutch of sand. "You won beautifully at the sports meeting, I didn't say anything." Junjie stood a few steps away, with both hands in his pockets, and his lingering voice, "If you want to say it, do you want to fuck me?" Yang Ming was silent for a while, then sneered, "No longer having the previous challenge, I have passed away, I am convinced. Your storm is indeed much stronger than my flame. However, I am not here to be jealous, I just want to say that there is nothing to say that the extraordinary people in the campus fight to fight, and there is nothing to do. Since you are the king, then you will decide the rules for the future." Junjie raised his eyebrows, but he didn't expect Yang Ming to say this. He pondered for a while and said, "Okay, I don't like to kill, but some things need to be explained clearly. In the future, there will be conflicts between the extraordinary people. Don't involve ordinary students or just do it in the campus. If you have any problems, come to me and I'll solve them." Yang Ming pointed his head and saw a flash of approval in his eyes. "Yes. Don't worry, although Yang Ming, don't convince others, I will just say something. In the future, I will not bother you again, nor will I tell who you are." Junjie looked at his eyes and confirmed that the other party had not said a hypothesis, so he relaxed his voice slightly. "That's good. Yang Ming, ability is not used to undermine others. Being able to help others is the real ability." Yang Ming hummed and didn't answer, but a slight smile came out from the corner of his mouth, as if he was a little moved by this sentence. He turned around and prepared to leave, walked a few steps and turned back, and said in a low voice, "Oh, by the way, I heard that you were very close to the girl named Qing Qing. Don't worry, I won't use her as a target anymore. What happened before is considered a mistake." Junjie pointed at the head and didn't say much. Seeing Yang Ming's back disappearing into the depths of the forest, a big stone finally dropped in his heart. He knew that although Yang Ming was proud, he could take the initiative to lower his head, which showed that he still had some bottom line in his heart. The conflict between the school's extremists has come to an end. Next, he can focus on his own growth and the people around him. When he returned to the dormitory, Junjie pushed open the door and saw Hao Yu sitting on the bed, holding a broken notebook in his hand, and a mysterious expression on his face. As soon as he saw Junjie coming in, he immediately jumped up and said excitedly, "Junjie, you are coming back just in time. I have a big discovery. What did you find out? Have you peeked at someone's girl's diary? Junjie rolled her eyes, threw her coat onto the chair, and chatted casually. Go to you. Haoyu replied without any hesitation, then passed the notebook and pointed to a paragraph above and said, Look, this is what I copied from an old alien. It means that perception ability can not only perceive danger, but also perceive other people's ability fluctuations, and can even predict the other party's next action. I have tried it over the past few days, and it has indeed been a little effective. Junjie's eyes lit up, and he took the notebook and read it carefully, and said, It's not wrong. If you succeed in practicing, won't you be a living thunder? Whoever wants to play in the future will know as soon as you feel it. Yes. Haoyu slapped his thighs, his eyes lit up excitedly. I guess if this ability is broken through, I may help you more. Let's make a fool of yourself. Who in the campus dares to mess with us? Junjie smiled and patted his shoulder. Okay, then you continue to practice, and the practice will be a result of our trial. Maybe there are more secrets waiting for us to dig in the campus. It must be. Haoyu grinned, then came over and asked in a low voice, Yes, what's the matter with Yang Ming? Are you really convinced? Junjie pointed and briefly said the content he had just talked about. After Haoyu finished listening, he relaxed his voice. That's good, this guy is probably not so stingy. In the future, can we be more at ease in the campus? Can we also practice our abilities, or help you follow Qing? Come again. Junjie glared at him without any hesitation, but he still couldn't help but sneer at the corner of his mouth. He knew that Haoyu was not right in his words, but he was more dependent on his feelings. During this period, whether it was training or fighting against Yang Ming, Haoyu was always by his side. Such brotherhood made him feel more precious than anything else. The night was shining, the moonlight outside the dormitory window came in, the campus was quiet, with only the occasional sound of horns. Junjie leaned against the bed, holding a sports prize in his hand, and recalled the points of this period of time in his brain, from unexpected awakening of Wen, to a scene of confrontation with Yang Ming, to the battle of the sports club and the final victory. He grew from an ordinary boy to the king recognized by the campus. More importantly, he regained the trust and the budding of feelings of Qing, and also had reliable brothers like Haoyu. Haoyu, what do you think we will do in the future? Junjie suddenly opened his mouth, looking out the window, and there was a burst of longing in the sound. Haoyu was stunned for a moment, then grinned, lay back on the bed, pillowing his brain with both hands. How is it? Of course, it's getting better and better. Your power of wind and my ability may be able to make a bigger flower. The secrets in the campus have not been dug up yet, and there may be even more powerful people hiding them. Let's all be able to make a sky come together. Junjie pointed and smiled. Yes, it will always be a sky. He looked down at the prize in his hand, and there was a hint of determination in his eyes. Although the movement ended, his youth and growth journey began. From an ordinary teenager to a campus king, he learned responsibility, learned to protect, and had the dual warmth of friendship and love. In the future, no matter how many challenges there are, he knows that he will not retreat. On the weekend a few days later, in the milk tea shop outside the campus, Junjie, Qing and Haoyu sat next to a small table, with a few cups of milk tea and a plate of cakes on the table, and the air was filled with a sweet fragrance. The sunlight came in from the window, which made the three of them feel particularly silly. June, I heard that you have been chased by many younger students recently and asked about running skills. How about it? Do you feel good about being a campus idol? Haoyu bit the straw and smiled so hard that his face was full of breath. What's so good? I'm so worried. Junjie replied without any worries, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes. But it's good to be able to help them. Qing smiled lightly beside her, picked up the milk tea and took a sip, and her voice was gentle. You are the king of the campus now, so of course you have to take it. However, you have to leave some time for yourself to teach others. Junjie felt warm in his heart and said, Don't worry, I will. In the future, let's share what's going on. Qing smiled and didn't say anything, but there was a little sweetness in her eyes. Haoyu saw this, deliberately coughed for a few times, and stood up and said, "Hey, I suddenly remembered that something was going on, so I'll take it off first." "Talk slowly, don't be too sweet, it makes me feel tooth hurt." Chan. "Okay." Ching looked light, and the sun fell in her eyes, as if there were countless stars hiding. The music in the milk tea shop is lightly rising, and pedestrians outside the window often come, and the youth story of the campus is painted with a warm sentence at this moment. Junjie looked at Ching's smile and felt satisfied. He knew that no matter how much wind and rain there would be in the future, he would not be afraid anymore, because he had her, brothers, and the power of his wind, which was enough to allow him to ride the wind and welcome every tomorrow.